we are focused in this series on the theory of critical thinking going deeper, more generally. And in this particular part of the series, we're focused on intellectual virtues going deeper. And we are focused specifically here on one intellectual virtue, confidence in reason. And as we know, of course, all intellectual virtues have interconnections. So we'll be exploring some of those. So like really all of the theory of critical thinking, we don't take it as an atom. We don't take one piece of it as an atom. We take all of these atoms as interconnected, so to speak. So Gerald, would you like to begin our discussion with a brief overview of the concept of confidence in reason?
Well, I don't know about brief, Linda, but I will begin with...
I did add that. I did add.
Well, confidence in reason is one of the traits, the virtues that is most often, I think, misunderstood. I think it does not mean confident that in the end, people will be reasonable. I mean, that would seem to me to fly in the face of so much of what we know. Some individuals are never going to be reasonable, and maybe all of us in some areas of our lives are not going to be reasonable. I don't want to stress all of us so much, but it's certainly in my own life, there are elements at times in my life where I've been unreasonable. So it's not confident that I or anyone else will inevitably be reasonable. So I don't think that's the prime meaning of confidence in reason. To me, what it means is, or one of its core meanings is that reasoning things out is the best way to find an answer to something, or is the best way to approach anything. The best way to approach things is via reason. And there's a way in which that can sound obvious, but it becomes it can become complicated very quickly, because there are a lot of things that seem opposed to reason, or to a lot of people seem opposed to reason, and I think that they're not, or they're not purely, or they are in this way or in that way, but not overall. And just before we began, I wrote a list of some of them, and I could bring those out later. Things that people often think are opposed to critical thinking, opposed to reasoning things out, but to me are not. So I did the brief part.
That was brief. That was definitely brief. Let me, if I could, just piggyback on what you've said, and then we'll go from there. So to me, confidence in reason means fundamentally that we, as thinkers, when we're embodying this, are willing and we desire to follow the facts wherever they lead us, even if we don't like where they lead us. And so we set aside our own interests, we set aside our egocentric orientations, we set aside all of the barriers to this, and we just follow the facts. Okay. Now, as you have implied, part of the difficulty, I think, with this particular virtue is that it seems that if you have someone, do you follow reasoning? Do you follow the best reasoning? Do you follow the facts? Do you just go with the facts, and does that inform your view? I think most people would say yes. I mean, they would say, of course I do. I'm always following the facts and doing my best thinking. And so the mind naturally thinks it is following the facts. But now the barrier of egocentricity comes in here immediately to me, because we can be following information, for example, that we think is factual, but is not actually so.
Right.
And so if somebody says, look, here's a great conspiracy theory, but let's say that I am so smitten with your argument, and actually maybe you as well, maybe you have so influenced me that now I'm carrying around in my mind these false ideas and I'm perceiving them as factual.
Right.
And so I would say under those conditions, of course I'm following the facts. I've got them. There's these conspiracies are happening, and we've got to be aware of these. And now I'm trying to distinguish here between a conspiracy theory that's not sound and one that might be sound. So, okay, so I'm saying that where it's not sound, but it appears sound, this is just one example of where we are led astray, but we think we're following the facts.
And while you were speaking, I was trying to think of a good example. I don't have one at the tip of my tongue, but I'd say there's the famous statement from Bertrand Russell about always follow the facts. But there's a large sense in which I find that to be unhelpful, not just partly for the reason you just said, because we can think things are facts when they're not, and we can do that. We're led to do that by our own egocentricity and our sociocentricity. But also, it doesn't seem to me that following the facts gets us far enough. It's how we interpret those facts that usually gets us somewhere, and the implications we take to follow from those facts. Very few questions that I come up with that are in any way interesting or intriguing or complicated are settled by facts, but they are settled, or they are advanced by how I interpret or the implications I take of them. So I tend to think of fact as of course, one of the elements of reasoning, right? It falls under the information category. But the conclusions I draw from those facts, that is how I interpret them, and what the implications are, often seem to do more of the work of critical thinking. So, yeah.
So let's burrow in, if we could, then to this, the relationship between the facts and the elements of reasoning. You've already mentioned this, but so just to expand that a bit. So we understand that whenever we reason, of course, we're using information, and we hope that information is correct and relevant to what the question at issue in the context. Right. So now we've got two of the elements, information and we have question, but we also have purpose, and the purpose is guiding, for example, our purpose is guiding the way we see the information, the very information that we are willing to look at. Go through all of the elements in this way and see that obviously we don't interpret, facts don't stand alone. They stand in relationship with the other elements of our reasoning.
Right. Yes.
And therefore, if we're, as it were, following the facts wherever they lead us, that means that we are thinking well conceptually. We're using sound assumptions to begin with. We're coming from a reasonable point of view, adding some other elements of reasoning.
Right. Yeah. So here's another example, a famous one from World War II. Some people think that Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew about the bombing of Pearl Harbor ahead of time. And there's some factual evidence that he saw communications that said an attack was on the way. But notice, if it's a fact that he saw the communications about that, that doesn't establish that he knew it was going to come. You need to ask questions. How many communications does he get every day? How often does he get communications which contain false information? So someone who's in a position of power gets lots and lots of information, and they have to discriminate very carefully between those that are reputable and reliable and that we should act on, especially take major action on, and those that are just passing over my desk over and over again. So the fact doesn't establish, in this case, the conspiratorial part. So confidence and reason to me embodies, well, the standards and the elements, right? That is, if I really want to reason out answers, I often have to look at many of the elements, not just one, and I have to apply many of the standards, not just accuracy. Yeah,
Right. So, and that's going to be true for all of the
indeed. Yes.
sexual virtues. We'll be able to find connections to all the elements and not necessarily all the standards, but possibly depending on the circumstances.